All right. So as people are coming in, welcome to Fill in the Blanks Like an Expert. And why don't you put in the chat how, if you have any questions about this subject before we even get started, to make sure we answer the question in the class or before we even get started. And also I'd love to know how many deals people have done, how long they've been in business, just to get a sense of, who we have in the class today. So let me just... So let me see if I can see the chat. All right, so in the chat, if you have any questions, please type in your questions. And if you're able to indicate how many deals you have according to these categories, whether you've done no deals, 1+, 16+, 24+, I'd love to know who we have in the class today. One, thank you, Graham. Liana, thank you. All right. So give it another minute while people are logging in. My name is Stacy Sanseverino, in case you don't know me. This is Erin Whitman, my operations partner. She will be assisting today as we need it. I'm going to go to the next slide, which actually, while you're here, if you want to type in this bit.ly link into your, let's see. Oh, wait, not that one. Sorry. There we go. If you type in this bit.ly link, you'll be able to get the class folder where all the downloads are. Throughout the presentation, you'll be able to download individual documents, but if you just want to enter the link once, you should be able to access all the documents that we'll be using. I will be showing them on the screen, so even if you don't grab them now, you'll still be able to follow along on the screen. But sometimes the documents get a little small when they're on the screen, and maybe you want to have it open to the side or you want to print it out. So take a moment and do that. All right, T's done one rental. Hey, T. Linnell, welcome. Natalie's in Central PA. Congrats on 2 pending. That's exciting. While we're waiting for another minute, back in the day before I got serious about my career, I used to go home after closings thinking my day was done. And then I learned better. It's just funny to think how far one has come. And I'm willing to bet that a year from now, when you look at today, having 1 or 5 or so under your belt, next year, you're going to feel like a completely different agent, especially when you invest the time to educate yourself about what the agreement of sale has to offer your clients. It'll give you the confidence and the skills to be a better negotiator when you know what's actually in the agreement of sale. So I'm really glad you're here. And yeah, in the chat, Erin has copied the bit.ly link, so you could just click on that, download all of the documents. All right, without further ado, I will start. So today we're going to talk, we're going to review the color-coded contract. So basically, I took the agreement of sale and I highlighted all of the blanks in the contract. I, in my mind and on paper, have default preferences for the blanks. So some are default as per the agreement, and some are based on what I know to be conventional norms in my market. And then sometimes when we're in, severe seller markets, I've changed those default preferences to be competitive. So I'll share with you, those differences throughout this conversation. And then you'll also understand which blanks you need to tailor for each offer. And then also which blanks will be only used occasionally, but knowing that they're there is good in case you have that instance where you need to use that term. And then I will share with you the Pennsylvania offer prep worksheet, and that will guide you through what information to grab from the MLS, what documents to grab from the MLS, and and using the buyer and seller closing estimates in order to put together a well-crafted agreement of sale. And then at the end, if you were in my last month's class, type in the chat if you were in my last month's class where we did the taming the timeline of the transaction. I shared with you my sample timeline bonus that basically went through the agreement of sale and put the dates and deadlines in the order in which you'll see it in the calendar. So type in the chat if you were here last month. And if you weren't, or if you were and you wanted to get the class materials, you can email us. And if Erin, you could just put in my email, stacy@agentuniversitybystacy.com, and we can make sure that you get that. We'll assume everybody here today would like the recording when it's available. So we'll just assume that, but also email us if you wanted last month's class. And again, if you want to type in the chat, if you have any questions off the top of your head that you've been dying to know, about the blanks of the contract, please type it in. All right. All right. So we did that. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So the agreement of sale, not every paragraph has a blank, and even paragraphs that have blanks don't necessarily need to be changed, and the defaults of the contract are typically fine. So these next few slides are just like a table of contents of, on page 1, there's a ton of blanks. You're going to spend the most time when you put your offer together filling in page 1, the property, the parties and the property. Paragraph 2, 3, 4, and 5 are all on that second page. So price, deposits, who's holding escrow, seller assist, settlement date, is it tenant occupied, the acceptance date. The next page you have paragraph 6, 7, and 8, zoning, inclusions, exclusions, mortgage terms, and then page, I don't remember, but paragraph 10 has some seller representation. So the water, the sewer, the historic preservation. And we're going to go through these at the color contract very shortly. And then of course, paragraph 12 and 13 is all about inspections, which inspections your clients are choosing, and then the deadlines in paragraph 13. And then paragraph 14 is all about ordering title. And then paragraph 26, default, termination, and return of deposits. So that's critical if you're on the buy side to make sure you update this paragraph and check the box at 26G. Lastly, on page 14 of the agreement, you got paragraph 32A and B, where if you're going to attach any additional forms that you want to make a part of the agreement of sale, you must click, check the box and include those forms. And then also, if you have any additional language that just doesn't fit anywhere else in the agreement, you can use paragraph 32B. And then lastly, on that last page of the agreement of sale, there are 4 documents, that 2 of which always apply: the consumer notice, the buyer closing cost estimate, and 2 may apply. Who knows when the deposit money notice does not apply? Type it in the chat if you know when the deposit money notice does not apply. And similarly, if you know when the lead-based paint hazards disclosure and pamphlet do not apply, type that in the chat. All right, who knows the answer? Who knows the answer? I have a feeling somebody's typing their answer. I'll repeat the question though. So the deposit money notice does not apply in certain instances, and the lead-based paint hazards disclosure and pamphlet do not apply in certain instances. Who knows when those are?
I know that. Oh, are we not? Okay, never mind.
Go ahead. No, come off mute. Come off mute. Well,
Well, pretty much said it. When when the house is built after 1978, you don't need it. But if it was built before 1978, it's you have to have it signed just in case the house has it. So
right. And I think so. We always want to make sure we know our thresholds. So I forget if it's homes including or after 1978, there's the language is on the actual disclosure. The deposit money notice is not needed if it's an in-house deal, because it's telling the buyer that their money is going to the listing broker. So if you are in the same brokerage as the other agent, then your same brokerage is holding that money. So you don't need to give the deposit money notice, because it's all about the cooperating broker. The other thing is, and actually, this is such a good example of every time I read the agreement of sale, I think of something new. I learned something new. Erin, would you open on your end, just like for yourself, look at the deposit money notice? I mean, technically the in-house deal is the listing broker, even if it's the same broker, technically maybe you should use it. So you look that up and just let us know what you think. But for sure, if the title company's holding it or an attorney's holding it, you wouldn't need the deposit money notice.
I've kind of wondered that myself. I'm pulling it up here. So it says for cooperative sales when broker for seller is holding deposit money.
Okay.
So it
then-
depends if, yeah, I mean, cooperative, if the broker is dual, you could argue it's not cooperative if it's in-house, if it's the same broker.
Yeah. And then the question is, well, how does the buyer know where their money's going? I guess they write the check, so they must know where it's going. But yeah, so I don't use the deposit money notice when it's an in-house deal or the money is being held by the title company. So I think the way Aaron read it, that's still correct. Yeah, so Linnell, I don't use it if the title company's holding it. Awesome, thank you. Okay, so some other forms. So the tenant occupied property addendum is going to show you when the seller must get the lease to the buyer and the deadline for the buyer to review the lease to make sure it's acceptable to them. And then the appraisal contingency is for cash deals or where the buyer is willing to ensure the appraisal gap. So if the appraisal comes in lower and they're willing to pay some difference, that's when the appraisal contingency is, it's good to use the appraisal contingency. Yeah, so Natalie's saying, what if your office is dual agency? Exactly. So if the broker is not a cooperating broker, so a cooperating broker as defined, I think by Pennsylvania, is another brokerage that is cooperating to represent the buyer. We're cooperating, we represent the seller. But if it's an in-house deal, then you're not technically cooperating brokers. It's the same broker. So you're not cooperating with yourself. Like, does that answer? I hope that answers your question. Okay, so if you want it, if the agreement here is too small, feel free to minimize this screen and open the color-coded contract that is in the folder that I gave you the link for. Erin, would you just copy the main folder link for people so that they can grab it if they signed in after? And I'm going to go through pretty quickly, just like some things that are obvious, but I will make specific note of things that I want to make sure you realize. So obviously page 1, like I said, is the most full of blanks to fill in. So at the top, buyer and seller names, the buyer's mailing address, which you should get from your client if you're on the buy side, the seller's mailing address. I just use what's in the public records. They might not actually live there. It might be different from the actual property, like if it's a landlord. So I just use whatever is found there. I don't really worry myself too much if they don't exactly live there. Definitely want in this section address and the zip code, the municipality, the county, and the school district. So in Philadelphia, all 3 are Philadelphia. Outside of the city, it's going to be, you'll look in the MLS for what's the name of the municipality, the county, and the school district. And then you definitely want to grab the tax ID. Don't mistake it for the MLS number. Make sure you're grabbing the tax ID. And then we don't usually use identification, this thing at the bottom. In the buyer relationship with PA licensed, what does it say, broker, you want to fill in all this information. With one of the most recent updates, they added company license and the state license for the licensee. So grab that from the MLS. So if it's not directly on the MLS listing itself, you could click into each licensee's names or the brokerage names, and the information should be there. If it's not there, don't be afraid to ask the other agent, or you can go to the Pennsylvania lookup for licenses. Erin, could you put that in the chat, the lookup website?
Yes,
And then,
I will do that.
Yeah. And then make sure you're selecting the correct representation choices. So, there's buyer agent and dual agent, or seller agent and dual agent for the brokers. And then on the buy side, on the licensee side, you've got buyer agent with designated agency, and dual agent, and then seller agent with designated agency and dual agent. You can just ignore the one where all company licensees represent seller. You can just ignore that. Designated agency just means that each licensee represents that specific client on behalf of the broker. So who can explain to me, when would you choose buyer agent and seller agent, or dual agent and dual agent? And you can come off mute. Who can explain how to know when to choose these guys?
So I can explain. If you're a buyer agent from one brokerage and then the seller agent is from another brokerage, you would select the one at the top for each one. But
Buyer
if you're
agent and seller agent, yep.
Yeah, let's say if I'm on a deal with you, we're part of KW Philly, so we would select the dual agent broker selection.
Exactly. And if we were from different brokerages, like you said, we'd pick buyer agent and seller agent. Remember, the client is the client of the broker. So that's why it says buyer agent, seller agent, dual agent under the broker. And then how would you determine whether or not it's buyer agent Linnell with designated agency or dual agent, and then seller agent and dual agent?
I would determine that if I was representing both sides, then I would go dual. But if I'm only representing one side, that means I'm only designated for the one side, depending on if I'm on the buyer side or the seller side.
Beautifully put. Thank you, Linnell.
Pleasure.
All right. Page 2. So we got paragraphs 1 through 5. Excuse the dogs in the background. Paragraph 1 is just the date you wrote the offer, never changes. Sometimes there will be documents that may reference the date that the offer was written, so you'll use that date. Paragraph 2, so you'll write out the price in numbers and also like a check. So for example, if something's $218,000 and 500, you say 218,500 and XX/100, meaning and no cents. So the and actually goes after all of the dollars, and then you do the fraction like XX over 100, meaning no cents. That's not super critical today. I just wanted to make you aware of that. And now paragraph 2, traditionally, we've made the deposit, $1,000 to $2,500, depending on the size of the deal. And the second deposit will be the balance of usually 3 to 5%, depending on if the buyer's putting 3% down, the total deposit would be about 3%, or 3.5% down, they'd put a total of about 3.5%. Or if they're putting 5% or more, we would make the total deposit about 5% total, subtracting the first deposit. And then that's what the balance is. The second deposit is the balance of that. In this market, I just put an offer in the other day. It was $700,000. So we just made $10,000 for the first deposit and $25,000 for the second deposit. Now, who knows what the benefit of a larger deposit is? Who can tell me? You can come off mute if you'd like.
Lower down payment.
So, okay, so I'm glad you said that. Deposits and the down payment are actually mutually exclusive. The down payment is as to what you're putting down with the lender towards the purchase price, and that affects your loan to value. Your earnest deposit, shows good faith to the seller that you're going to honor the deadlines in the contract and not waste the seller's time. So the higher the deposit, the higher the risk for the buyer to just ignore deadlines and waste the seller's time. We use the down payment as a guide as to how much to make the earnest deposit. I swear, every time I get on Zoom, my dogs go crazy. Sorry about that. So the higher the deposit, the more risk the buyer has. So sellers like higher deposits, but usually it's actually the listing agent that likes higher deposits, because we know the importance of having skin in the game and people not wanting to lose their deposit. In reality, sellers don't care as much about deposits. And it's very, very, very rare that a seller will ever keep the deposit. So, for what that's worth, put as much as the buyer feels comfortable putting down with that first deposit. And I always shorten that to 3 days, because it's easy in this day and age to wire money safely, of course, and get that money over. I don't want, 5 days later is way too late, because if you don't have what's called consideration for the property, for the agreement of sale, the buyer can just terminate and there's no ramifications to the buyer for terminating. And they might have done an inspection in the meantime. And now they've done an inspection and give you that inspection, and that could hurt your next negotiations, as opposed to they just, terminated, they just walked away. So you want to get this as close to execution as possible. The second deposit, I usually tie to the end of the inspections. So if I've shortened the inspection windows, I might make the second deposit due by day 13. If I use the normal default in the contract, I might make it 17 to 18 days. Okay, paragraph 3, seller assist. So I have a whole nother class. Sorry. on how to pick the perfect seller assist where 6% is allowed, because the higher the price goes, the lower the closing costs are as a percentage of the sales price. So on a $500,000 loan or purchase, your closing costs might be 4.5 to 5% of the total sales price. So if you write in 6%, because 6% is allowed, you're wasting money. You're leaving more money on the table because you can't get that high. So use the dollar amount. And in no case should you put a dollar amount and a percentage, just use one or the other. Okay. And if there are any questions as I go, like I said, I was going to move fast, but you'll get the recording. You can feel free to type something in the chat as a question. And Erin, if you see a question, like alert me to stop to answer it. Settlement date, that's the date the buyer wants to take possession of the property. Down here in paragraph 4H, if the property is tenant occupied, you'll want to include the tenant occupied property addendum. So that will enable the buyer to review the lease and make sure that they want to be bound by the terms of the lease, because technically the tenant has an equity interest in the property, or they have an interest in the property, and it overrides the sales contract. So anybody who buys the property needs to honor that lease. And then that gives the buyer a certain amount of time to actually look at the lease and decide if they want to move forward or not. There is a provision for negotiations, of course, if the tenant is open for negotiations. Now, if your buyer is buying a tenant occupied property that will be vacated by closing, I have used this form because I want to make sure that the seller can legally give the tenant notice to leave the property. So it's up to you whether you use it if the property is going to be vacated by a tenant before closing. And then lastly, on this page, we've got the date and times of the essence. So this is like the expiration date of the offer. So if the seller signs off on the offer after this date, then technically the buyer can say, no, the offer is expired and it's not valid. This agreement is not valid. A lot of times buyer's agents will use this to pressure a seller to respond quickly. And I will say this, it's kind of irritating. If the seller sees that they potentially have other offers and they know your client wants the property, are you not going to want the property tomorrow? The only reason why I would ever believe a pressure tactic like this is if it's an investor. And like I've been in this situation where we literally had 3 or 4 offers out at one time, and they were going to just pick whatever offer, whatever seller gave them the best deal. But most deals are not like that. So, I don't even put too much stock in the acceptance date that I put, unless I know that the buyer will want to move on quickly and I don't want to remember to have to withdraw the offer. If, that date is like a week out, I don't want to have to remember to withdraw that offer if we've moved on in that time. Again, type any questions you may have in the chat. All right, paragraph 6 and 7. So paragraph 6 is pretty straightforward. Just type in the zoning code, in there. I typically like to use like whatever the actual code is, not like residential. I'll put in RSA 5, RSA 3, or RM1, put it in there. Fixtures, personal property. So number 1, read this paragraph, understand what is automatically included in the sale. And there are certain items that are not automatically included because they're considered personal property. So washer, dryers, refrigerators, window units are all considered personal property. So you must write them in here if the buyer wants them. You're leaving your buyer open to getting to closing, and the washer, dryer, and refrigerator have been sold to another party by the seller if you do not include them here. Chances are the seller is going to be too lazy to do that if they didn't intend to take them, but you don't want to leave that open. Literally, one of the first properties I bought, there was no washer and dryer in the property, but it was in the MLS and the agent did write it in the agreement of sale. And when we got to closing, I was like, where's the washer and dryer? He's like, oh, they were never here. And he was actually a dual agent. I was like, well, I don't care. It was written in the agreement. So I ended up getting a $400 credit. It was 20 years ago. So anyway, so make sure you include that. You don't want to get to closing and then, having had a great transaction, have to kick in money because you made a mistake. Now, certain elements are considered fixtures, but I think are a little bizarre to consider fixtures under certain circumstances. So that is the curtain rods. So you can see that existing window screens, storm windows, and screen storm doors, window covering hardware. So it's normal, like blinds, yeah, shades, blinds, that makes sense. They're cut to fit the window. But curtain rods and brackets, if somebody bought, designer curtain rods and brackets, they might be planning on taking them with them. So as a listing agent, ask your client, did you intend to take those with you or leave them? Because according to the contract, they're fixtures, they stay. Similarly, the mounting hardware, mounting brackets and hardware for television and sound equipment is a fixture. So my thought is, it's my flat screen. I'm taking my flat screen and I need the mounting hardware. I'm going to take it with me. So as a listing agent, ask the seller, did you intend to take the wall mounts? So you want to make sure if you're on the listing side and the seller wants to take them, make sure they're included as excluded. They're written in as excluded in the agreement of sale. As the buyer's agent, if you see these two items, ask the listing agent, is the seller's intention to leave or take the rods and the wall mounts, TV wall mounts? That way there's no question mark as to what you're going to find in the property when you get to closing. And then of course, if let's say the seller is removing the curtain rods and the wall mounts, you want to indicate whether or not the seller is going to repair the wall or replace the curtain rods with something else. So you can indicate that, in the same paragraph 7D, where you're indicating that those things are going to be excluded or replaced with another item. This also goes for like a chandelier that might be special to the seller. I would advise have them replace it out before you even go to market. That way it doesn't become the subject of negotiations. Any questions on this section or anything we've discussed? I know we're moving fast. Well, Erin will pause me if a question pops up. All right, paragraph 8. So that is your mortgage. So I've literally had agreements of sale come across my desk without this waived or elected. So you need to make sure, especially if it's elected, that you select elected. And then you're going to fill in loan amount, minimum term, type of mortgage, the loan to value, the lender, today's interest rate, and the maximum rate that the buyer will pay, whether or not they'll pay points, and what the loan approval date is. So the loan amount is derived by the loan to value multiplied by the sales price. Who can tell me how you figure out what is the loan to value? How do you figure that out? Aside from the lender saying what it is. And you can take yourself off mute or you can answer it in the chat. What's that?
Sorry, my cat ran across the keyboard. You multiply whatever the percentage is times the sales price, and there you have like if it was 80% and you have a $400,000 sale, 80% times 400 will give you 320,000. Great.
So what's related to the loan to value? How do you figure out what the loan to value is? So it's 80%. What's the inverse? What's the inverse of the loan to value?
I think it's the loan amount divided by the sales price.
No, it's the loan amount divided by, say, the percentage. If it was like 320,000 divided by 0.8, we give you 400,000.
Right. So you guys are making it way too hard, and I probably didn't ask the question well enough. So the down payment. So if somebody's putting 3%, 20% down, the loan to value is the inverse of that. So 3% down of the sales price, 97% would be the loan to value. So they're borrowing 97% and they're putting down 3%.
Right. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I did not ask the question well enough.
Hey, can I ask you one question?
Yeah.
Let's say you're going with a mortgage, but you're waiving the mortgage contingency in this day and age. Should the information on the mortgage still be filled in on this form if you're waiving the mortgage contingency?
It should be waived. It should be waived.
Yeah, it should be waived, but is it appropriate then if you're going to still go for the loan to fill in those blanks regarding the loan information?
It should be blank.
Okay.
If you're waiving it, you're waiving it. And, you could have, I was recently in a situation where I was presented an offer and the buyer couldn't prove that they could pay in cash. And it just made me really uncomfortable I don't know why, like maybe I shouldn't have cared, but like, if you can't prove that you can pay in cash, I don't want the seller to accept an offer that you might default on. That just seems really messy to me. So I was like, let's just elect the mortgage. If you cannot prove, and I guess because I wanted to see the terms, I wanted control over the lender, because the lender is important. If somebody gets an online lender, flying by the seat of their pants, and the underwriting department's in one state, their loan, the loan officer's in another state, and there isn't that local knowledge, I don't want to see that lender doing our deal. I want to make sure that it's a reputable lender that doesn't have known issues. Like, there's just certain lenders I've had problems with, and I'd rather kind of have it clear. Even if
this is a situation that actually happened to me where, the people could pay in cash, but they wanted to do it. I mean, they even showed proof that they could, like 520,000 when the deal was less. It was in the 400s. So they provided the proof of funds, but they were also, planning on taking out a loan, but it was just structured that way. So, there was debate whether or not by some of my coaches, whether that area of the form should be filled out. So I want to know your opinion. I mean, I can see why you'd say no, since it's not elected, but at the same time, it was, if they do plan on taking the loan, there was the information. So you know what I mean?
It doesn't matter. Like, so those are, obviously two separate situations. And I literally had the same situation where my client could pay in cash. They waived the mortgage, and then they went for a loan anyway. We also did write it in that the buyer had the right to get an appraisal, because we didn't want it to be there to be a question whether or not the seller had to let the appraiser in. So the information, if the mortgage is waived, is irrelevant, because the default would be you buy it in cash. I didn't feel comfortable to have it waived when there was no potential for the buyer to buy it in cash. And I knew that he was going to get a loan, where in that case, they could do whatever they want with regard to loan. They would have to suffer the consequences. Let's say they went for FHA and repairs were required. They would have to figure it out, or pay cash. So I would say don't fill it out if it's waived. Term, in terms of minimum term, is usually 30 years, but a buyer could always do it in 15. And then type of mortgage, typical loans are FHA, VA, PHFA, which is basically Pennsylvania's version of the Federal Housing Finance Administration loan. I have VA twice. Conventional loan and USDA loans, which are like for more rural areas. And then the question is also, do you write in the lender name or not? If a buyer has a lender that has a very specific program that's going to give them grant money, or they qualified based on certain aspects, they might want to be very specific as to the mortgage lender. Because then if they don't get a loan with that mortgage lender, they're protected. But if they write buyer's choice and they could get these terms, but not that special consideration that the one lender would give them, then they're pretty much stuck going with any lender that can give them these terms. On the listing side, you may want it to say a specific lender because you like that lender, but it also doesn't kind of make the buyer look to other alternatives if that lender doesn't work out. So whether you put in one lender or one lender in buyer's choice, I would say you talk to 10 agents, you'll get 10 different opinions. As far as interest rate, obviously just put in today's rate, put in the maximum rate the buyer is willing to pay. Generally speaking, 0.25% more is usually acceptable for a normal term, like a 30 to 45 day closing. Anything longer, I want to see a bigger spread. And in this volatile market with rates, I would, you might even want a 1% spread between today's rate and the max the buyer will pay. Now, I harp on this a lot, but who can tell me what happens? What's the first line of defense if the rate goes above the rate, the maximum rate indicated in the agreement of sale? You can come off mute. Can the buyer terminate the deal?
Yes.
I like how your voice went up at the end, because it's actually no.
No.
The buyer has to give the seller the right to pay points to get them into that rate range before the buyer can terminate.
Wait, you're saying the seller would pay points? The difference?
So I don't have page 4 here because there's nothing much on page 4, but on the next page, there's a paragraph that indicates that if the rate goes higher than the rate here, the seller at their sole discretion or option can pay to get the buyer to make these mortgage terms available to the buyer. That's the first line of defense. If the
Oh,
seller
it's
says,
seller's assist.
well, it wouldn't be a seller assist, it would be the seller directly paying those points, or it could function as a seller assist where, let's say it's $2,000, they make the seller assist $2,000, and then on the buyer side, it shows the points as $2,000. Essentially, it's the seller paying directly for that to get them in this rate range.
In other words, the seller has the option to keep the deal alive.
Yes, yes.
Good to know. Thank you.
Yes, yes, exactly. Because I don't know how many, I'd love to know how many deals died because the seller's agent didn't know that. And then this, most homeowner occupants are not going to pay points. So you could just leave that zero blank or put in zero. If you're working with an investor, especially if you're on the listing side, find out how many points are associated with that loan in that range, because you want to make sure they're included there. The loan approval date, I usually put 30 days out from the time we make the offer. You have to pick a specific date. If you want to be competitive and get it faster, or if you're on the listing side and your seller needs to buy a home or move quickly and they want to be sure that this deal is going through, make it a date like 3 weeks out, or 21 days out from making the offer. Because regardless, you always see the 7 days down here under 8B, 2B. The buyer is still additional 7 days beyond this date in order to get that loan fully approved, aside from conditions that would happen normally close to closing. So if that appraisal is still outstanding, they still have essentially 28 days, even if you put this date 21 days out. Okay. All right, paragraph 12. Please only choose the inspections that the seller or the buyer is going to do that makes sense for the unit. Also note, when you're dealing with these older houses with sewer lines that have not been replaced, you do not know if they're going to break until they break. So if you want to recommend, which I always do, the sewer line video scope, that is actually covered by the home inspection contingency itself. It is a separate inspection, but it is covered, the right to do it is covered here. So you don't need to indicate that you're also doing that. If later the buyer, if the buyer wants to also test whether there's lead in the water, they can actually do that because interior and exterior plumbing are covered by this. If there is potential asbestos or other or mold, that's covered by this. So this is a pretty robust inspection contingency. But generally speaking, if you work with a lot of city properties, most of these are not going to make sense. Termite mostly does, except for condos typically. Deed restrictions and zoning is really mostly good for like if there's in-law suite, or if it's multifamily, you'd want to do that. Water service is really for a well, if you have a well. Radon, a lot of buyers want to test for radon. On-lot sewage is really only if you have a septic tank on-lot sewage, which if you're connected to the city sewer, you do not need to elect this. Again, you're covered by the home inspection to do the sewer scope. Property and flood insurance, I usually do elect this one because nobody really is concerned that a buyer is going to terminate based over insurance premiums. So I elect it just in case, because that will affect their monthly payment. All right, given the time, I'm going to keep moving. Inspection deadline default. So, property boundaries. If there are no fences, I would say get a survey, even though it's not required in Pennsylvania. If your client's house does have fences, but backs up to a large piece of land owned by one property owner, I would still say get a survey, because I had a client who later learned that the property behind them that was going to be developed by a developer, they had a garage and their fence was encroaching on that lot by about a foot. So that was discovered when the developer was going to develop the other land. So the way you cure that is you either pay money to the other person to basically move the lot line, or you have to move the fence and move the garage. So when in doubt, get the property boundaries. But generally speaking, if you've got, a fence and houses on two sides, you're attached, you got the property or the street at the front, a yard with a fence, and then an easement for an alley, and then another fence for another house. Most likely you don't need a property boundaries or a survey. Lead-based paint hazards, if it's painted, it's most likely encapsulated. If the buyer does want to do it, make sure that they actually test where it's important, like the window inside, like, and around the windowsills, because that's where lead-based paint is more likely to be remaining as opposed to just like a wall that's already been painted. This little blank here, if you want to exclude anything from being negotiated, you would write that in right here, right above the D. So if, for example, the seller knows that the roof needs to be replaced and they're like, you can inspect and negotiate over anything else, but you have to accept the roof condition, you would put the roof, the roof gutters, etc., flashing right in here. The default inspection timeframes are 10 days for the buyer to do their inspections, make a request, and then 5 days. Let me get this out of the way. 5 days. Sorry, my 5 days is hidden down here. Hopefully you can see my cursor. 5 days for the seller to do their own due diligence and negotiate with the buyer. So the way to be competitive is maybe shorten that to 8 days, shorten the 10 days to 8 days, or even 7 days, shorten the 5 days to 4 days. And if you're in a competitive situation, don't be afraid to recommend to the buyer, hey, schedule your inspection now. Maybe you can schedule it for 4 days out. And then we can say our inspection timeframe is 6 days. And you'll tell that to the seller when you make the offer, hey, we've already even scheduled inspections so that we can do this quickly. And then if you've shortened, here's a pro tip. If you've shortened this inspection period and you will not have time to get actual estimates, make your request in repairs. If there's going to be negotiations, make your request in repairs, and then you can still obtain actual invoices or estimates and negotiate over those. So, don't be afraid to bleed the investigation into the second period, which is the negotiations period. But absolutely 100%, your client needs to accept by midnight on this day, whether it's 10 days or 8 days or whatever day, and or terminate by that time or make a request. And then lastly, for the inspection, where did it go? Oh, I think I'm missing a slide. I apologize. So there's on the next page, page 9 at the top, there's a 2-day final decision period. If the seller does not agree to everything that the buyer has requested, they have another 2 days in order to decide if they'll accept or terminate. All right, buyer's agents, this is super critical. You want to make sure that you shorten this 180 days, make that 30 days or less. Anything less than 7 days is just obnoxious, because that's the time frame in which the seller has essentially to file a claim of mediation to keep the buyer's deposit if they believe the buyer has defaulted. Sometimes damages won't even be known until the seller sells the property to another party and gets less money. And they could say, the buyer defaulted, I got $20,000 less on the next sale. So this buyer, the first buyer, owes me $20,000. So that's why it is such a long time frame. But generally speaking, if you make it 30 days or less, nobody's going to bat an eyelash. And then, of course, as the buyer's agent, make sure you select paragraph 26G. That way, the seller cannot sue the buyer or pursue more money than is on deposit from the buyer. So if, for example, the buyer has $35,000 on deposit, but the seller can prove $50 worth of damages, they can't sue the buyer for more than $35,000. All right. Let's see. Paragraph 14, use 32A if you need to attach any addenda. A lot of them are pre-printed here, but the price escalation is not. So make sure you put that in there. Any additional language like about a tax abatement or missing documentation, which is not ideal. You're supposed to have the seller's disclosure and lead disclosure when you make the offer, but certainly you could put that language in there, or if there's longer clauses that don't fit elsewhere. And then lastly, we discussed this at the beginning. You'll have the buyer initial at the consumer notice and the estimate of closing costs. Make sure they have got those, they've received those 2 documents, and then deposit money notice for cooperative sales. And the lead disclosure, and this will answer our question, 1978. Yeah, so if the property is built in 78 or later, it is fine. You do not need it. But prior to 78, you need that disclosure. Tenant occupied property addenda or addendum. So the standard is 5 days to get the lease to the buyer, 5 days for the buyer to review it. So similar to condo docs, where there's a 5-day review period and the buyer can terminate up until the time they receive the documents and up to 5 days later. If you're the listing side, you want to run out the clock fast on the buyer on this. So get them the lease as soon as possible So that way the 5 days starts ticking. Appraisal contingency. So this form, I love this form. They've really accounted for the fact that a buyer may not want to just pay the difference in cash if it doesn't appraise, but that it will indicate that they can pay in cash or they can change the loan to value if the property doesn't appraise. So anyway, this form gives a lot of flexibility. So you'll either leave this blank for the purchase price, or if the buyer is willing to accept a property at a lower appraisal and pay the difference in either cash right down here, or adjusting the loan amount or loan to value. And then if you're going to use this form and it's a finance deal, make sure this date is the loan approval date plus 7 days, because this form has a limitation on the appraisal timeframe. The agreement of sale has an appraisal window timeframe, which is the loan approval date plus 7 days. So at least try to make them match so that you don't limit the buyer's rights per this addendum. Okay. So we are nearing the end of our time. So you're going to see, if you type this in your browser, or if you downloaded the folder, you will have the Pennsylvania offer prep worksheet that'll indicate where to find what information is important from the MLS, what documentation is important, and using the MLS to create your buyer and seller closing estimates depending on the side of the deal. That's what this form is for. I will say that be very mindful of the presentation of offers. If a listing agent has put presentation of offers in the MLS, follow it to a T, because that will show you actually care about the details and you're paying attention. I can tell your skill level and how new you are based on how you present the offer to me and how you fill it out. So number one, follow the instructions on the presentation of offers. Number two, if you've only done a few deals, have a veteran agent review it, whether it's a coach or a mentor or somebody, have them review your documents before sending them out. And let's see. Yeah. So, and then you can get the sample timeline to get the default standards with the agreement of sale. That'll help you out too. It's another tool. Let me just see something. Okay, yeah, so this is what the sample timeline looks like. It'll give you some information, some of the stuff that we've talked about today. And then one other thing I want to, let's see, stop share. Wait, let's see, I want to share the PA offer. Yeah, so this is what the PA offer prep sheet worksheet looks like. So you can print this out and follow along. So make sure you're finding the following information. And yeah, here's the Verify a Professional website if you need it. Documentation that you might be looking for, and information in the property disclosure statement. What's important that might affect the offer that you put together. And then the rest of the form is basically like, if you want a worksheet, for the most part, for page one, I just copy and paste from one form, from the MLS to DocuSign or .loop, whatever you're using. But then these other things, if you print this out and you look at the MLS, consider the offer you're putting together, you can then use this as a guide as to what you need to be filling in the blanks. So we have come to the end of our time together, 11 minutes. So I want to leave time to answer any questions that may have come up, and you should have already downloaded this if you wanted to check it out before we say goodbye at 11. But what questions do any of you have?
I don't have a question, but I just wanted to say this was very, very, very helpful, and I appreciate all the sources and details you've given us.
You're welcome, Kevin. I appreciate the thank you.
Yeah, I literally submitted an offer last night, and I feel like I should have had this class yesterday or something. It would have helped me out a little bit more, but I'm just crossing my fingers for my offer I just submitted.
Well, I'm crossing my fingers too. And I will say, you don't know what you don't know. So it would be far better for you to get guidance on your side of the transaction from somebody in your office or market center than to rely on the good graces of the listing agent, because while we are cooperating, they're not going to tell you, oh, you forgot 26G, which protects your client. Like that's not their job, you know? So yeah. Does anybody else have any questions? And if you don't have a question, but you have an aha, I always love to hear what was helpful from today, such that you'll be able to use it in your business.
Stacey, we have just a question in the chat again about how the recording will be disseminated.
Would you like to tell them how the recording will be disseminated?
I was in the rapidly admitting people in the beginning of the class, and I believe
Well, so
the arrangement that folks will email us and we'll send it.
Yeah, so I wanted to share close preview. What am I doing? So slideshow. So Erin and I actually run a training platform for agents that's delivered to people online and on your own time and supported by a weekly masterminds. So there's more opportunity if you wanted to, join us in our Pennsylvania Clients and Contracts Bootcamp. And I'm just trying to get the link up there. So we will actually, if you wanted to receive this as a lesson that we put together with all the downloads and the handouts, we can actually deliver it to you through our learning management platform. That way you can see what it would be like to be a student in our program. So yeah, so we will be sharing that with people so that they can check that out. What other questions? I see another, let's see, a chat. Let's see. Yeah. What other ahas? I'd love to get a couple of ahas, something that you learned. Or anything on the any of the forms, because we still have a couple minutes before we have to go, that you'd like to review. So Hannah says the timeline sheet is amazing, very helpful, awesome. Who loves cheat sheets? I love creating cheat sheets because it makes my life so much easier. Any other ahas? Linnell, did you learn anything new today? Because you've been around for a while.
For me, it was that I don't need to include the sewer scope as an extra. It's now included under the home, what do you call it, inspection? I didn't know that. I thought that was always an additional thing.
Yeah, no. And you know what? I will tell my client, like, hey, let's not alert the seller that we're doing this by putting it in the closing estimate. I'll just like kind of on the side say, okay, what you need to close is X plus that inspection. Because I know it's, in a competitive situation, because I know it's covered by the home inspection. And then Melissa, I learned how the seller can keep the sale alive with the points, paragraph 8. Yeah, most agents do not know that. Victoria says she's attended, oh great, she's attended many classes, but this one gave good push up and excitement to be an agent. I agree. I think just knowing these contracts inside and out is really exciting because it makes you really smart, about it. And gives you the confidence, how to protect your client, and that's what we're here for. Who else has an aha or something that they learned today or a question?
Stacey, I have a question. I know you say put 3 days for like the first deposit. Would you allow somebody to come in and do an inspection prior to receiving that deposit?
No.
Okay.
I mean,
so like if you go on a contract like today and they're like, well, I scheduled the inspection for tomorrow, but the deposit's not due until Tuesday.
Okay. So technically, if the intention is to do the inspection before the deposit, no, but I don't have control whether or not they actually do it if it's not due till X date. And maybe there's a situation in which you would like, be like, yeah, don't waste your money and time on the deposit if the deal's going to not go through. So yeah, so no with a caveat.
Okay.
But yeah, you want to make it a little painful for the buyer to terminate after inspection. It's a great question though. Yeah, because the farther along, I was talking to a buyer about making an offer on a condo the other day, and I'll tell you this, the more questions a buyer has, the less likely they want the property. So I was kind of getting the sense like, oh, there's too many question marks here. This is not, so they ended up not making the offer, but we were talking, there were certain things that's like, okay, let's find out XYZ after we get under contract, because it didn't impact whether or not they would buy it. So it's like, all right, let's push that question off until after we get under contract, because too many questions up front is like a red flag. And then B, once people are in the contract, they're stickier. It's a little less attractive to terminate. All right. What other questions? We still have 5 minutes. So if you have to go, you have to go. If you want to stick around and stare at me and Erin, feel free, but we're here to answer any more questions or take any more ahas or feedback.
Besides the points thing in paragraph 8, are there other ways the seller could keep the deal alive?
In regards to the mortgage or
anything, I guess, that you could use with the agreement of sale?
Yeah, I mean, so the inspections, they could agree to do everything, but the buyer has to ask. So the buyer has the ultimate right to say, I don't want the property no matter what. But if they ask for anything, the seller says yes, the buyer has bought the property. I believe technically, like I'd have to look at the mechanics, but let's say it doesn't appraise and the seller says, oh, we'll lower the sales price. I don't know why the buyer wouldn't want to move forward with the property at a lower sales price. But
he probably didn't really want it.
Yeah, exactly. These are like especially useful in the case where the buyer is just like, yeah, they really don't want the property, is to get out. Yeah. What other questions? Any other questions?
I guess I can add that I like the sorry, I'm sorry for pressing my space button. I like the whole little guideline as to how to figure out how much to put down for their earnest money deposits based on like the percentage and based on like, how I think you quoted saying having skin in the game.
Yeah.
Because I'm never really sure like how much to put, but now that I know, I can put down like 1% or 2% for the initial and then like, 3 to 5% for the second amount and when to give the second deposit, that's pretty helpful.
Yeah, good. I'm glad that was helpful. And to be clear, it's actually a total of 3 to 5% that typically matches the down payment with the lender. It's just a guide, but essentially if you put, 1% down in the first deposit and 4% down in the second deposit. So it's not like 1% and then 5%. So it could be, and those are just guidelines. Like it used to be just like, oh yeah, $1,000 was good enough, So I was just like thinking what percentages would make sense, So like, so that $10,000 down payment on 700 was what, like 1.4%, something like that, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Any other questions? All right. Well, all right. Have a great weekend, everybody. Go sell a house or two.
Thank you. Take care.
You're welcome, Graham. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.